For those who seek adventure, this is the Buffalo Roamer Podcast, sharing the people, places, and moments that make a life on the loose worth living.
The thing that's going to stick out to you most is when they open up that plane door. The cold is something like you've never felt.
The jungle's so thick, even if you had a machete, you couldn't get through it.
There's a huge blonde grizzly bear. And when it saw us, this thing put its head down, stomped on the ground, and hissed like an alligator.
I just crossed this brutal stretch of desert, and I was really suffering.
I'm your host, Will Collins. I'm an adventurer, outdoorsman, and roamer of wild places. I've backpacked the Brooks Range, rafted the Grand Canyon, and have canoed from source to sea, both the Mississippi and Yukon rivers. I live for adventure, travel, fresh air, and diving into the unknown. And now, I hope to share my passion with you on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. All right, here we go, episode 61. Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying the show, make sure you're subscribed. That way you'll get the latest episodes right when they drop. Also, new trips out. 2023 Buffalo Roamer Wilderness Trips dates are officially out, as well as destinations. You can check out that info at buffaloroamer.com if it piques your interest. I'll be hosting 5 wilderness canoe trips at destinations across North America this year. Small group trips, so you got to have a good attitude and want to be out in the woods for a number of days. But if that sounds like something up your alley, go check it out at buffaloroamer.com. We have limited spots on these trips, and they're already starting to go. So yeah, buffaloroamer.com to join us on a backcountry canoe trip this year. Okay, today's episode, Jason Jamar is on the podcast. Jason is host of the Long Journey podcast, his own show. That podcast covers his journey and trip that we're going to talk about today, mostly talk about. He hiked across the country and then built a kayak and then kayaked across the country, I should say. That's an extremely oversimplification of the trip, but we'll get into all the details right now on episode 61 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors with Jason Jamar. Tell me a little bit about this long journey you do here. I see I got a few notes just from going over your website. 16 months, 4,000 miles. You hiked from California to Maine and then kayaked from Maine to Texas. Is that a fair synopsis there?
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate assessment.
Wild. And what made you want to do something like that?
Well, the short answer is I tell people I hit my head on a really big rock. But the long answer is that I was in the Marine Corps previous to all of my adventuring, and it's if you're not going to be a lifer in the Marine Corps, then you are anxiously counting your days until you get out, because you find out pretty quickly that those who are the guarantors of freedom and liberty have very little themselves. And so I was looking forward to getting out and traveling on my terms and not having to be told where to go and when to do it. And a couple of buddies and I kind of started concocting this idea that we could walk across the United States. And it kind of evolved, and eventually it was just me that ended up doing it. But I planned and prepared and just put this trip together to walk from California to Maine, and the kayak trip came out of the walking trip. Because if you walk all the way across the continent, do you just take a bus home? You fly home? No, you got to do something just as grand. And I was actually working in a youth camp for a few weeks in July of, I guess that was 2000. And I'd walked to Ohio, and I'd had arrangements set up to work at this camp for a couple of weeks. And I was just a camp counselor. Did that pop up on your? Let me see if I can mute that.
Nope, I think you're good. I didn't hear anything.
Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, I'm working at this camp as a camp counselor at this little camp in New Philly, Ohio, called Camp Buckeye. And we took the kids canoeing, and I thought, oh, this is the way to go. The weight is now in the boat instead of on your back. And so as I was finishing the hike up to Maine, I started kind of thinking, okay, I see how the Allegheny, Ohio flow down to the Mississippi to the Gulf. And well, there's the Intracoastal Waterway, and I could take that around the Gulf Coast of Texas. And well, there's the Colorado River that empties at Matagorda, and I live streams feasibly I could do this, and that's kind of how it all came about.
Amazing, man. I'm glad you came to that realization. It took me a while too to realize that you can go from carrying everything on your back to putting everything and more in the boat.
Yeah, man, it makes a huge difference.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, I still love backpacking, but come on, for me personally, boating and canoeing is it's the way to go. You can bring everything, bring a cooler, bring all the stuff you need. And I always say too, and I'm sure maybe you found this as well, is I think like a river is it's the lifeblood, like the main artery of any ecosystem. So no matter what valley you're in, right? If there's a stream that runs through it, a river that runs through it, through the heart of that valley, that's where the most life is going to be drawn to. The most plant life, trees along the banks, all of the animal life comes to that river or to that stream, whatever that waterway might be, to drink, to bathe. It's just like it's the main artery of that particular valley, and it's just such a great way to see the wilderness, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. I agree. You know, especially like going down the Ohio and the Mississippi, it not only is it draining over half the nation, all the drainage.
Getting broken in on?
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Well, let me fix that. That's
yeah, no problem. I thought someone was busting in on you.
Our internet connection. Oh, but just the commercial value of the rivers as well. I mean, so much economic trade and goods come up and down the Mississippi and the Ohio, and all through our nation's history. I mean, that was the lifeblood of our country. If you really think about it. And I mean, you think about like the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. They put ships at New Orleans and stuff that kind of hampered down on the trade and really hurt the economy. So the rivers are hugely important and very vital for definitely economics and and wildlife and I'm searching for the right word, but
it's the lifeblood.
Environmentally, I mean, it just really is the lifeblood.
Yeah, 100%. And I completely agree. And it was neat for me when I did my Mississippi River through paddle. That all kind of hit home as well, especially like you said, the commerce, especially on that lower Mississippi. And I'm interested to hear how it is on the Ohio. I have to imagine it's very similar. Yeah, just the amount of grain, the amount of petroleum, the amount of plastic products, the coal, like you name it. That's how a lot of this stuff gets to the Midwest, gets to America. And also another little interesting tidbit that I always have to think about for the Mississippi is I want to say it was one of the first areas that was settled by the Spanish, right? Like the mouth of the Mississippi down there in New Orleans, the Spanish settled there super early, and commerce flew from there.
Yeah. The Spanish came in early in like 1500s, and then the French came in after them, and I mean, like, was the early 1800s, don't get me the line, but I know it was Thomas Jefferson with the Louisiana Purchase. And, that was a huge swath of land that was added to the United States. And of course, that included all the Mississippi Valley, coming up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, the Spanish still had everything west of Texas. And then, of course, Mexico took independence and Spain was out the door, except for maybe Mexico took over all.
So, yeah, you were saying how you got to build the I lost you like right as you were starting to answer that, unfortunately. Go figure.
Okay.
So you were saying the specific route, and then how you got to build the kayak.
Okay, so the route from Maine to Texas was about 500 miles of the North Atlantic, from Freeport, Maine to New York City, and then I went up the Hudson River through the Erie Canal, and then I paddled Lake Seneca, the largest of the Finger Lakes, from the North Shore to the South Shore to Watkins Glen, New York. From there, I knew some people because I'd walked through there the year before, and I called them up and said, hey, I need a ride 100 miles west to Salamanca, New York. And that's the headwaters of the Allegheny. And so that was my major portage. And there, it was all water for the rest of the way. And from Salamanca, I paddled to Pittsburgh on the Allegheny. And then in Ohio, you pick up the Ohio River there, where the Allegheny and the Monongahela come together to form the Ohio River. And then it was 891 miles of the Ohio until Cairo, Illinois. And that's where the Ohio runs into the Mississippi. About 650 miles of the Mississippi to just above Baton Rouge. And that's where the old river lock is. And the Red River comes in there. And if you paddle up through there about a mile, you get to the Atchafalaya. And I took the Atchafalaya down to Morgan City, Louisiana, and that's where the Texas Colorado empties. And I paddled upstream about 400 and...
The route sounds, absolutely amazing. I love how you're connecting all of the rivers. Just amazing. How many days was the river trip?
Gosh, man, I'd have to go back and look at my notes. It was about 8 months.
Wow.
But like 9/11 happened in the middle of it. And so, I was at the World Trade Center 6 weeks before it was bombed.
Holy cow.
And I have this great shot where I'm in New York Harbor in my kayak, and I have my dog BJ. Oh, that's the other thing, is I had a dog with me. So my dog BJ walked with me from Marble Falls to Maine. And when I built the sea kayak, I built a tandem design, and I made his cockpit just for him to sit in. And then it had a bulkhead, directly fore and aft, so I had more storage up front. But he had his own cockpit. And so he's looking at me with the World Trade Center over his shoulder while we're in the New York Harbor.
Wow.
And that was six weeks before it was bombed.
Holy cow. Wow. And
yeah.
Just wild. And talking about the wild route, too, in the New York Harbor and on the Hudson. Those are, that's some high traffic areas, huh?
Well, you would think. So here's the thing. When I paddled into Boston, it was like playing Frogger. There is so much nautical traffic in Boston. It's a huge, huge nautical town. And then you got Logan Airport on an island right out there in the harbor. And so you have planes flying right over your head. It feels like you just reach up and touch their wheels. And there's the boats everywhere, yachts and sailing ships and harbor cruisers and tour boats and people in fishing boats. I had to keep my head on a swivel the whole time. And some of these harbor cruisers throwing big 4-foot wakes, and you're like, ah! And then New York Harbor, man, there's it's called Governor's Island. It's right out there, and there's nobody at all on the whole island. It's deserted. I think it used to have an insane asylum or something on it years ago. No, nothing there. Huh. And the only traffic really was, you could see a bunch of big container ships on the New Jersey side, but on the New York side, like where Manhattan and stuff is, there's hardly any traffic at all. You see the Staten Island ferry going, back and forth. But compared to Boston, it was like a ghost town. And it was so wild because, I think back then it was like 11 million people or something in New York City and hardly anybody on the water. And I was like, this is so crazy compared to Boston.
Huh, that's interesting.
And Providence, I paddled in Providence. It had a little bit more boat traffic, but it wasn't anything like Boston.
What I want to ask you about building the kayak, but what were the main differences, or how do you compare and contrast the hike across America, the walk across America versus the paddle across America?
Well, like we talked about earlier, once that weight is off your back and it's in the boat, man, it's just such a paradigm shift. And you're just like, why would I ever go back to carrying so much weight on my back? I still enjoy backpacking, but, of the two modes of travel, kayaking is definitely the way to go. But, but there's different aspects of it. So paddling along the East Coast, every night I would have a new town to paddle into and paddle up onto a harbor or a dock and camp on a beach and be able to get to a restaurant and eat out if I wanted to or what have you. And that was pretty much the case until I got to the Mississippi River. And then it's like you're in the wilderness. You go 100, 150 miles in between places that you can get over the levee to some kind of town. And that was very comparable to out west when I was hiking. So once I got out away from San Diego and over the mountains, man, I'm hiking through deserts and wilderness, and it might be 6, 7 days in between towns. So I don't see anybody. I don't really have resources. I had to pack it all with me. And so it was very similar in that the Mississippi River was kind of like traveling across the Old West. And then, from Central Texas on, when you're hiking, man, you could be at one town for breakfast and another town for lunch and another town for supper. And, so it's just as you go further east, the more populated it is. And that was kind of something you didn't really think about when I was, before I had done it.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. I love that part about the Mississippi, and I think it's so underrated and under maybe unassuming in that way that, yeah, especially the lower Mississippi, like you're saying, just massive sandbars. It's all just basic wilderness. Like you could be out in the Serengeti, as you mentioned, with the towns back behind the levees, and you wouldn't even know it. And I think, I think it's just so underappreciated, I guess.
Yeah. It's definitely a wilderness. And, the wildlife, one of my favorite things, I don't know if I'm OCD or ADHD or whatever. I don't know. I can just focus on one thing for a really long time. And man, I could just sit there on my kayak and paddle all day. And I never got tired of watching the water break off the bow and watching my paddle, go into the water and come up again. There's just something fascinating about that. And to watch the wildlife. I mean, like the pelicans. Man, they're like, to me, it was like watching Top Gun. They fly like an F-14 Tomcat, and they fly in those formations, and they're so graceful. I just love watching the pelicans, and and the big blue herons, and it was really fascinating, and
Is there any wildlife in particular, other than the pelicans and great blue herons, that stick out to you from either the hike or the paddle?
Oh yeah, definitely. I guess from the paddle, since we're talking about that at the moment, I remember I watched a bald eagle and an osprey fight over a fish. I guess it was on Lake Seneca, and that was so fascinating because the bald eagle was outclassed. I mean, that osprey was flying circles around him, and he ended up getting away with the fish. But it was so fascinating to watch. I mean, never seen anything like that before. And then, on the ocean, I remember paddling into Providence, Rhode Island, and I'm getting, I guess I'm probably about 10 miles from Providence, and I'm out there in the bay, and I see this dorsal fin come up, probably about 30 yards away, and it's coming. I'm like, oh, that's big. I'm thinking, man, it's a shark. And then it starts to kind of flip-flop and just kind of flutter, and then it flops over and goes under the water. And I thought, well, that's really peculiar. And then it flops back up and comes at me some more and then flops over to the other side. And I thought, great, my first shark, and it's sick. And this guy comes up to me in his big old boat, and he's like, hey, is that an ocean sunfish? And I said, I don't know. And then it got right below my kayak, and my dog and I are both looking down at it. And it was black and white, looked like a baby orca whale or something, but it was an ocean sunfish. I think they call them a maui. I have to Google it every time. A maui or something like that. They're giant, weird looking fish,
like bright yellow, kind of bluish.
I think they come in different colors.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah, but I mean, I can Google it real quick, but they're just. They're just so fascinating, and at first I thought, oh, it's a shark, and then it wasn't a shark at all. And I guess they're kind of rare to see, but
sure,
they're out there.
That's wild, huh? And how about on the hike? Any?
Oh yeah. I almost got ran over one night by a bull elk the Arizona in the Mogollon Rim.
Jeez.
Gosh, I stepped up on sidewinders in the Mojave Desert, hiking at night through the desert because
What-
it was so hot to hike during the day.
What happened with the bull elk? How did that go down?
So I was camping on the it's called Rim Road 300, and it runs right along the Mogollon Rim through the Apache Sitgraves National Forest in Arizona. And I'd gotten in, and it was after dark, and it was cold, and I built a campfire, and I'd sat there and let my fire die down, and I was tired. I climbed into my sleeping bag, and I'd fallen asleep, and it was probably 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, and I hear this bull elk start to bugle. And if you've never heard a bull elk bugle, it's a game changer. You know, it sounds kind of like humpback whale song, only on land and a lot more vicious.
Wow.
And so he's just a few yards from my camp, and he bugles, and it scares the daylights out of me. And I jump up in my bag, and I'm trying to get my zipper unzipped, and I'm kind of the fog of war sits in. I'm like, what is that? And I realized what it is, and I just kind of hollered. I said, yeah! Well, it spooked him, and he started running. Well, he started running towards me. I could just hear these massive hooves just glug, 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 glug. I thought, man, I'm about to get pummeled in here. And right at the last moment, I guess he smelled the campfire, saw my tent, saw something, and he turned on a dime, and there was this fallen pine tree right next to my camp, and he jumped over that tree and then took off in the other direction.
Holy cow.
And, of course, I couldn't go back to sleep for a while because my heart's just pounding. I'm like, oh, I almost got ran over, And so
Insane.
that was my bull elk and the snakes in the Mojave Desert. Coyotes all the time. I thought I ran into an alligator one night on the Allegheny. I'm sorry, the Atchafalaya. And that turned out not to be an alligator.
No, what was it?
So I'm paddling along, and I'm trying to find a good place to camp. And the water is moving really swift on the upper Atchafalaya. It's actually an alternate route for the Mississippi. And the Corps of Engineers will push about 30% of the Mississippi down the Allegheny. And even more during periods of high water, which this was. There had been a large storm system that just come through the week before, and the river had rose 10 foot. I mean, it was just, I was stuck in a barn for 4 days, just torrential downpour. And when it finally let up, man, I got back on the river and I made tracks to the Atchafalaya. And it's moving. And so I'm moving along at night because I hadn't found a good place to camp because, the further south you get in Louisiana, it's harder to find good dry places to camp. And I'm making this bend in the river, and I had a headlamp on. And then also when I night paddled, I had, the red and green navigation lights on my kayak. And then also kept a deck light so I could, shine on anything that looked suspicious or whatever. So, like a headlamp, it kind of has diffused light, and I see this red reflective light coming back at me way down in the river, and I thought, ooh, that's an alligator. I mean, it looked just like an alligator eye. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to just kind of slow my stride down here a little bit, my pace, and let him do his thing. Well, as we made a few more bends of the river, he's drawing me in. I'm getting closer and closer, and I'm thinking, I don't like this one bit. I mean, it was a big eye. And, I have my dog right there in front of me, BJ, and I'm thinking, dogs are delicacy for alligators. And so I'm getting closer and closer, and I'm starting to freak out, man. And I shine my big light on him, and something doesn't look right because it's always just one eye. It was like he was just keeping his profile to me and just drawing me in. And then as I got closer, it was kind of bobbling funny, and I was like, what is that? And I got to look in, and it was a green medicine bottle with a piece of red reflective tape on the bottom of it.
Jeez.
And I think it must have been a trout line that someone had run, and the high water had broken it free, and it was just bobbing along.
That's funny.
But, man, it looked just like an alligator eye, reflecting my light back at me.
Oh, that's hilarious.
It was intense for a little bit, but I was pretty relieved when I found out it was just a medicine bottle.
That's funny. So when I was on the lower Mississippi, I think this was somewhere, I forget exactly where, but I think it was somewhere south of Baton Rouge, I want to say, maybe farther south. I
Uh-huh.
forget exactly where, but that was my first kind of run-in with gators and gator tracks. I was camping. I pulled off to a big sandbar, and it was like kind of dusk when I was pulling in. Long day of paddling, tired, and as a northern boy, I could tell by the way that you're a good Texan when you tried to scare the elk by going "Whatcha"
Oh,
whatever your sound was.
yeah.
Yeah, there you go. You sound like a good Texan, but yeah, I'm just a northern boy up here, and so alligators aren't in my typical repertoire. Bears, grizzly, black bears, elk, deer. None of that stuff really spooks me too much. But didn't have too much experience with gators. So when I was down there, yeah. So I it's dusk. I'm pulling off the river. I find this great big sandbar, and have a nice big fire, and right as I set up my tent and get the fire going, I noticed a bunch of tracks in the sand, and it looked like something had been dragging. And I thought to myself, boy, those sure looks like alligator tracks, but I don't know. And somehow I still had service on my phone, so I Google alligator tracks, and
Oh no.
sure enough, the first thing that pops up is the exact track of the arms on either side, and then the belly
Yep.
being dragged in the
Yep.
sand, across the sand. And I was like, oh geez.
Yeah, there were several nights, man, where I camped on the Mississippi, lower Mississippi down there, and I found tracks. And see, I was fortunate that the time of year I was on the Mississippi, I think was basically between Halloween and just right after Thanksgiving. And so like right after Halloween I got onto the Mississippi, and then I was only on the Mississippi River for like 28 days. And so and that was crazy because the Ohio River is basically like 20 lakes, because they have a series of 20 dams. And so you go through these locks and dams, and it's, the first, I guess, 700 miles of the Ohio River, there's no current really.
right, I forget
Or
about
at least
that.
there wasn't the year I came down. Now the last 100 miles, when the Wabash was flooding and it was running into the Ohio, and that gave me a current. I was like, oh wow, this feels great. And the first day I got onto the Mississippi, I was blown away, man. I was like, whoa, this is massive, and this is some current. And I had been paddling at night on the ocean and on the rivers, and then I thought, there's no way I can paddle after dark on the Mississippi. It's too monstrous.
Yeah, it's a
But
big beast.
after a few days, I got to the hang of it. Got used to the wing dams and the current and stuff, and I was okay. But anyway, I got kind of on a tangent there.
No, it's great.
Uh,
So what was your general MO on both of these trips? You sounds like you did a lot of night paddling. Doesn't sound like you were running and gunning for speed. What was your kind of overall pace and kind of MO of the trip?
so I really wanted to kind of get an education out of it. And so I would stop and look at historical markers, and if there was a museum or something, I'd stop and go take a look and kind of try to learn as much as I could about the section of the country I was in. And I'm kind of a foodie, so I definitely love to go find something new to eat. And you burn so many calories doing this kind of travel, and especially out west, man. Well, the whole trip I craved pizza and steak no matter what. And so, man, I get to town and I would just load up. And especially like coming down the Ohio and the Mississippi and stuff, you got all these little convenience stores. They have that, I think it's called Brothers Pizza. I mean, it's crap pizza. But they're not bad, but I get two of those large pizzas and I take it back to camp and put it on the river. I eat one for supper or maybe two for supper and have a little bit left over for breakfast. And it's the kind of pizza that we keep all night, without refrigeration.
Right, I know exactly what you mean, all too well.
But yeah, my MO was just to take it slow, meet the people, and that was the biggest thing, was the people. I mean, everywhere I went, I met incredible people. They would invite me into their homes. You would start to realize that it was the people that had great powers of observation. When I was hiking out west or even anywhere in the country, some people would just look at me and go, "Oh, he's a homeless guy, he's a hobo, whatever." But other people would look and say, "Oh, well, look at that equipment he's carrying. That's kind of a expensive backpack, and man, he's carrying a lot of equipment." And especially if I was in a restaurant with all my backpack and everything and a laptop pulled out and sitting there typing on my laptop, people would really stop and do a double take. And it was then people would come over and start asking me, "Hey, what are you doing?" And once I tell them, like, "Well, where are you staying tonight?" "Well, I don't know yet." "Well, come stay with us." "Okay." And I mean, so many people opened up their homes to me, both on the river and the hike. And it was phenomenal. I probably drove in just about every state that I walked through because people invite me home and they say, "Hey, do you need to go to the grocery store? Do you want to go see a movie? Here, take the car, take the truck." I remember hiking through Jackson, Mississippi, and I met this fella. He had a 3-story condo, and he didn't have anybody on the second floor. And he said, "Hey, you're welcome to it, and here's the Lexus if you need to go do your laundry." And I go to this laundromat in Jackson, Mississippi, driving a Lexus.
Wow.
It was just phenomenal, the generosity that people showed to me out there traveling.
It's just amazing, isn't it? And it's you hit the nail on the head too. When it's interesting to hear you say people with good observation skills, or however you put it, tend to be the ones who pick up on it. Yeah, it's just amazing, isn't it? The generosity of people, and also the interest of people. I mean, just going to a restaurant and hanging out and sitting out and I guess I think what it is when you're living your dream or doing something that people can tell is fulfilling to you, even though it may be against the grain, that rubs off on people and they're interested in that, and it sparks a little something in them too, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, people wanted to live through it through vicariously through my adventures. I carried a laptop and a digital camera with me so I could kind of document my travels. And of course, now today you can do it all with a smartphone. But this was in '99 through 2002, and so I carried the stuff with me, and I had maybe 40 or 50 people on my email list when I started, and I had well over 500 at the end. It was just people I met along the way. It was well before Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, any of the social media. So it was just people that I met. I can't imagine what it'd be like doing it today. I mean, gosh, just a GoPro, man.
Yeah,
Man,
great.
the crazy footage I could have just with I had a GoPro back then.
What are there any? Is there any interesting story of somebody that you met along the way that comes to the forefront? Obviously, as you mentioned, hundreds, if not if not hundreds, dozens, however many amazing people welcomed you into their house and stuff. So you don't want to forget anybody, obviously. But is there any one that comes to mind to the forefront?
Oh man, there are so many. There really is. But one of my favorite stories, or this is a good one because it transitions from the hike to the kayak. And I was in Maine, rather I was in Boston, and I had a friend that I went to high school with. Her and her husband lived in Boston, and I got there for Thanksgiving, and I spent a couple of days with them visiting. And on a Sunday, I went to the bank with my bank card to the ATM to get some money out. Well, later in the day, I realized I didn't have my card any longer. And so we went back to the bank, and I couldn't find my ATM card. So first thing Monday morning, because I was due to leave out the next day, the first thing I get on the phone, I call my bank here in Marble Falls, Texas, and I said, "Hey, I've lost my card. I need you to cancel it and send me another one." Well, back before 9/11, you could ship anything anywhere in the United States, general delivery. And so you just said, "Hey, care of Jason Jamar, general delivery, Kosciuszko, Mississippi." And they would hold it for a month and before they would return it to the sender. And that's how I did a lot of my supply drops from Texas on, as I'd had a lot of boxes of goods and supplies that I prepared, and everything past Marble Falls to Maine. Every now and again, I'd say, "Hey, Dad, I'm couple of weeks out from needing a supply drop. Can you send it to this place? So I told the bank, I said, hey, 4 days is about 80 miles if I'm conservative. Wells, Maine. So ship my car, general delivery, Wells, Maine, and I'll pick it up there. So the day that I get to Wells, Maine is a Saturday, and it's 3:45 in the afternoon. Well, this is mid-December. I think it's like December 12th or something. Well, this is maybe it was a little earlier, but anyway, it's early December. I don't remember the exact date, but I can tell you that the sun sets around 4 o'clock in mid-December in Maine, and I'm sure it's the same for a lot of the northern climes. And I'm 3 hours and 45 minutes past the post office closing because it's a Saturday, and I'm 15 minutes before the sun sets, and there's already snow on the ground. It's cold, and I'm like, man, what am I going to do? I have to wait till Monday till I get to the post office. And I was right outside this little service station. It's called Brown's Auto Service, and nature called. I need to use the restroom. So I walked over, and I saw a couple of gentlemen outside attending the place, and I said, hey, can I use your restroom? I said, yeah, sure. It's in the back. Go on, make yourself at home. So I take care of business. I come out, and they're kind of laughing and cutting up and going, man, I sure hate to be this guy. And I laugh and tell them, say, I've walked here from San Diego, and I only have 250 miles until I reach my goal. I'm almost finished. And they're like, whoa, and we get to talking, and I explained that I have to stay in town until Monday until I get to the post office. And they said, oh, well, we have a camper in the back, and it has a heater. You can stay here until Monday if you like.
Wow.
I said, oh, man, that'd be terrific. And so I camped there the night, and it was a nice heater. It kept me warm. It was great. And so the next morning, there was a little cafe next door, and I was hungry. And so they said that my dog, BJ, could stay in the shop with them while I had breakfast next door. Well, while I'm having breakfast, this retired Marine colonel and his wife, this George and friend Philip, they're on the interstate about 20 miles to the west. They break down, and they get towed to the service station. They had a leak in their coolant hose. And so they're there getting repaired. And my dog BJ jumps up in Fran's lap in the waiting room and just plants a big old kiss on her cheek. She falls in love with him. He's like, man, y'all have the sweetest, greatest shop dog. And the guy's like, no, it ain't our dog. It belongs to this crazy Marine walking across the United States. Well, George says, Marine, where's he at? And so while I'm eating breakfast next door, I'm on my laptop. George steps on in this loud, commanding military voice says, I'm looking for the gentleman walking across the United States. And of course,
sure everyone
quits eating and looks up, and I just kind of sheepishly wave, and he comes over and introduces himself. And he says, Jason, you get up to Freeport, and we'll put you up for the night. Make sure you have a warm bed, warm meal, the works. And I said, oh, man, that'll be great. And we get to talking and visiting. I said, George, Freeport, Maine. People since Louisiana have been telling me about this camping store in Freeport, Maine. It's open 24 hours a day. No matter what time of day, you can go in there and you can check out equipment. You can test it out. Someone's on hand to help you out. And I said, I think it's called LL Bean or something like that. And he says, well, Jason, you get to Freeport. We'll make sure you get to see all the sites. I said, okay. So we exchanged information. A couple days later, I get to Freeport, and I'm outside the Delorme World Headquarters. They make maps. And it's this several-story building that's glass, and it has this giant globe inside. And there's a payphone outside, back in the day when they had payphones. And I pick up the phone, and I call George, and I said, George, I'm here. I'm outside the globe. And he says, all right, I'll be right there. True to his word, warm meal, warm bed, shower, everything. It was perfect hospitality. Well, it snows 8 inches that night. So the next morning I said, oh, George, I don't really feel like hiking today. I want to go see this LL Bean place. And he says, well, Jason, Fran is the senior vice president at LL Bean. We're going to make sure you get to see everything. And so we go down there. We meet Leon Gorman, who's the grandson of LL Bean. Super nice guy. And they show me around and introduce me to all the folks there. And Leon is like, hey, Jason, is there anything that you need to finish your trek? And I stopped for a second. I said, well, honestly, I'm about 2 months past schedule of when I was anticipating being finished. I was anticipating finishing in the fall, and I only have a 3-season tent. And the tent is pretty threadbare right now. I really need a better tent. He said, well, that's all. Bam. Brand new mountain expedition tent.
Wow.
I mean, this thing was awesome. And it was 4 seasons.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so brand new tent. And so we leave, and instead of going home, we drive about 30 minutes north to Augusta, which is the capital. And we're next to the capital going to this mansion. And I said, George, what are we doing? He says, well, there's someone else who would like to meet you. And I said, well, who is it, George? And he says, well, it's the governor. And I said, why does the governor want to meet me? And he says, well, we went to high school together in Virginia when we were kids. And now we ride Harleys together in the summer. And I told him all about you. And now he wants to meet you. I said, oh, well, this is so cool. and so timing is everything. Just like, that leak in the coolant hose and my lost ATM card. All these events just kind of fell into place. And so now I'm meeting the governor, and they gave me a copy of his itinerary for the day. At 12 o'clock is the annual press corps luncheon with the governor. And at 1 p.m. is Jason, Jamar, and BJ meet the governor and the first lady.
And BJ.
Yeah. And BJ was a huge hit. I mean, he was a star everywhere he went. But the annual press corps luncheon is basically all the heads of all the major media in the state of Maine. So your television media, your radio media, and your newspaper and print media. So the head honchos for all these different news outfits are having lunch with the governor. So they're leaving as I'm coming in, and the governor said, hey, guys, y'all might just want to stick around and take a few notes. And so for the next hour and a half or so, I basically get interviewed by the governor and the first lady of Maine. It was Angus King, and now he's the U.S. Senator from Maine. And they're all over in the corner on the side just taking notes. And the next day, I'm an instant celebrity in the state of Maine.
Holy cow.
Everyone knows who I am because, Maine is popular in the summertime. Millions of people go up there to vacation. No one goes there in the winter. And here I am hiking to Maine in the winter. And so the last 250 miles of my trek was like this parade. Outside of every town, the media's there to greet me and do an interview, and people are honking and saying, hey, come eat here. Come stay the night here. And, so the rest of the trip, everyone's waiting to meet Jason and BJ. And then the day that I finally finish the hike, I'm 2 miles outside of Calais, Maine, and it's the campus of the Washington County Technical College. And there's about 30 or 40 people there to greet me, and they all walked the last 2 miles with me. It's kind of like Forrest Gump. And they had a state trooper in his dress blues, and then a Royal Canadian Mounted Police, like Dudley Do-Right, in his red uniform. And they both escort me all the way, and we get to downtown Calais, and the deputy mayor of St. Stephen, New Brunswick, Canada, is there to meet me. And he says, hey, on behalf of Canada, we want to invite you to finish your trek in Canada. I was like, okay. Wow. And so we all walked across the International Bridge into St. Stephen, New Brunswick, and officially ended the trip there.
Wow. How cool is that?
Yeah. And so the very next day at that campus, the Washington County Technical College, the faculty invited me to have lunch with them. And so while we're sitting there having lunch, the president of the school, his name was Bill Flahive. And he was like, hey, Jason, what's next? I said, well, I've been thinking about maybe taking a canoe down the Ohio, Mississippi rivers. And he gets real quiet for a moment. And then he says, well, Jason, you walked through our other campus in Eastport, Maine yesterday. And it's the oldest boat building school in the country. What would you think about maybe building your boat there?
Wow.
And I said, yes, I want to do that. And then that's what led into the kayak trek. I spent the winter building the kayak there, and then the rest is history, as they say.
Amazing. How about the serendipity of all of those interactions, huh?
No kidding, man. No kidding.
Holy cow! So tell me about the kayak. What was building the kayak like, and give me a rundown on the kayak and the kayak building school.
Okay, so they were famous for building this type of a rowboat called a Whitehall. They're really, really picturesque, beautiful boats, and the woodworking is phenomenal. And they also do a lot of fiberglass work and stuff. And so the type of kayak I was building was designed by this fellow named Nick Sade, and he has a company called Gilmont Kayaks. And he puts out a book called How to Build a Cedar Strip Sea Kayak. And it's probably one of the best how-to books I've ever read. And we ordered blueprints from him, and we ordered 3 sets. The president of the school, he built a tandem kayak, or I'm sorry, he built a single kayak, and they hired a retired instructor to come in and teach me, and he was a woodworker. He built a tandem, and then I built a tandem. So we all 3 spent the whole winter building these sea kayaks, and we each
Wow.
built our own. And I mean, it started with rough hewn cedar that was 3/4 of inch thick planks. And we ran them through planers and we cut them into 1/4 inch strips. And I had to put a bead cove on every strip. I built these strong backs that had these forms that would give the ultimate shape to what the boat would be. And you staple and glue these strips together, and it looks like a giant piece of spaghetti. And then once you get it to where you want it, you sanded it and removed all the staples. Then you lay fiberglass on the outside, and it's in 2 halves. You also fiberglass the inside, and then you tape and fiberglass the halves together, so you have your deck and your hull. And I beefed mine up. I put extra glass on the bottom and the top because I was designing it for this long trip back to Texas. And so when it was said and done, it was probably about 9,500 pounds. It was a pretty heavy boat. And it was 20 foot long. And like I said, my dog BJ had his own cockpit.
Did you
And
have much?
I'm sorry.
Did you have much woodworking or shop experience before? building the
No,
boat?
I had never woodworked before this. And so it was a big learning curve. I mean, and my instructor's name is Jim. Uh, Jim Verge, and Jim was very patient, and he showed me how to use all the different saws, and the band saws, the jigsaws, the planers, the routers, and I just it was probably about 500 to 600 man hours. That's basically what I did for that winter, and I also had to build up my travel budget, so I got a janitorial job at Georgia Pacific. They had headquarters building there in Calais, and I would vacuum and clean toilets and office buildings at night and build a kayak during the day. And then there was also a movie set. Fox had this stupid show called Murder in Small Town X, and it was filmed right there in Eastport. And so the nights I wasn't a janitor, I was a security guard on this TV set.
Wow.
And it was anything I could do to raise money so I could do the next leg of the trip.
That's funny, and that's amazing. And so this is a whole 2-year process. Is it 2 year or 4 year? 2 years, right?
It was 2.5. It
Yeah.
was 16 months for the hike, about 5 months to build the kayak, and then about 8 months to paddle home.
Wow. And how did the boat hold up on the journey?
It held up perfectly well. I mean, I still have the boat today. I did when I got to Houma, Louisiana. I took a few days to refiberglass the keel because it was starting to get pretty rough. It was some of the wood was starting to get exposed a little bit because it just been so much wear and tear. And I thought I'd beefed it up enough, but I was like, no, I need to go ahead and refiberglass the keel on this. And it was funny because I met this fella in Oil City, Pennsylvania. His name was Ken Chickering III, and he was a 4th generation oil and gas man. And in Oil City, Pennsylvania, Oil City is where they discovered oil in Pennsylvania a long time ago. And I'm paddling along this really nice section of the river, of the Allegheny, and I see this country club and a lot of really, really decked out nice houses that have been there for a while. And I'm coming along in the spin in the river, and I see this really beautiful green lawn, and there's a flagpole in the yard. And it had an American flag, and it had a Texas flag. And I said, whoa, what's a Texas flag doing up here in Pennsylvania? And I just happened to see the guy walking across his yard, and I said, hey, where are you from in Texas? And he says, oh, from the Woodlands near Houston. I said, oh, well, that's kind of a space, a ways off from where I live. I'm from Marble Falls. He says, Marble Falls? He says, that's beautiful up there. What are you doing here? And I said, well, you're never going to believe this, but I'm paddling there right now. He says, nah. He says, get up here. And so I docked on his, tied off on his dock, and he took me out to lunch, and I was able to get a shower, and we stayed in touch. He said, well, hey, I'm the president of Daniel Valve. It's an oil and gas manufacturer. They make these giant valves for the oil pipelines. And he says, you get down to Homa, give me a call. We have a warehouse down there, and there's an apartment. You can stay there and rest and relax for a couple of days. And I said, well, that'd be great. And that's what I did. I used their warehouse. They had a spot where I could work on my boat for a few days, and it only took a couple of days. I had to just kind of strip it and refiberglass and epoxy the bottom and varnish it, and then I was back on the river. And then Ken actually lived in Texas, and so I stayed in touch. And when I got to Galveston, to the yacht basin there, I called him up, and he had a slip there, and he was waiting for me. And so we left my boat there, and I hadn't seen my family in a couple of years, and so this was right before Christmas. And I mean, it was like the 23rd or something. And he said, hey, take my car, go see your family. So I drove up from Galveston about 3 or 4 hours up to Marble Falls.
Wow.
Surprised my family for Christmas. And then I drove back, got back in their water, and paddled. And the last time I saw Ken is I was near Wharton or Baytown or something on the Colorado, and I broke my paddle. And I had given my spare paddle away to another canoeist on the Mississippi River the month before, and I just let him keep it, and I broke my paddle and didn't have a spare, and so I had to turn around and paddle downstream with a half a kayak paddle, and Ken met me on the shore with another kayak paddle, and then I continued on my way.
So funny. So tell me the upriver sections again. You paddled up part of the Colorado in Texas?
Yeah, so the upriver section was the Hudson River in New York City. And of course, it's tidal for 154 miles all the way up to Troy, New York. And so half the time you're fighting the current, and half the time the current's with you because it's tidal. And then I paddled up the Colorado there in Texas. And so that was pretty tough. I was pretty acclimated to paddling quite a few miles, but then when I started going against the current, it slowed me down to where I was doing like 15 miles a day again. But then after a while, I got pretty good at it. And, if you ever want to get a crash course in river paddling, you should just paddle up a river, because it teaches you so much so fast about how to read it. Like where the snags are, and, how to read the V's in the current, in the ripples, and, the standing waves. Man, you can really get a quick education by paddling upstream versus downstream.
That's a really interesting thought. I've never thought about that before, but I definitely know it to be true. Man, it kicks your butt too. You better have that nose tucked in as close to shore or as close to the eddy line as you can, right?
Yeah.
Every millimeter matters.
And the other thing is, if you actually, a kayak only draws just a few inches. A canoe also. But, I only drew maybe 4.5 inches of, in the ground, in water. So, I'm pretty shallow water I can paddle through. And so actually, as you're going upstream, as the current's coming down, it eddies along the bank. And so it helps you paddle upstream. If you're just right there along the edge, you can just kind of have a little bit of help going upstream because the way the current eddies back up.
Yep, just hop along the eddies along the way. Use the river to your advantage, right?
Yeah, it was fascinating.
What were some of the bigger challenges on either leg of the journey?
So I had this idea that anytime you go off on a really large adventure like this, any kind of big trek, there's going to be something that really just tests your mettle right at the beginning. And so at the beginning of the hike, I'd gotten up into the Pacific Crest Trail. I'd walked from San Diego up into the mountains, and I had a small section of the trail I was going to hike until I got over the mountains to the desert. And originally I wasn't going to do this, but I'd went up there in July of 99 and I scouted it out, and there was plenty of water in the little streams and creeks. And I thought, yeah, the springs are flowing well. This will be good. And I was still in the Marine Corps at the time. And then I get deployed to Korea for my last month in. And so I went up there in June, and I was still in California in July. But then all of August, I'm out of the country. And I come back at the very end of August, and then I get out, and then I drive to Texas, and I'm burying water in key locations across the desert Southwest. I'm dropping off food and supplies in 25 cities between San Diego and Marble Falls. I'm doing all this prep work to get ready for the trek. And then I take a Greyhound back to California, and I start the walk. Well, during that time, there had been a drought. And when I got to the trail, the first spring I came to was flowing, but none of the others were. And the streams and stuff were dry, and I was like, ooh, this is not good. And I carried almost 3 gallons of water with me when I was, I packed everything full. And I'd run out of water out there, and I got to this one point where I almost ran completely out of water, and I got really anxious, and I had this really hard day where I got on top of the trail, and I'm looking down, and I'd already come across some water on the trail earlier that morning, and I pulled out my little pure water filter, and I'm, pumping it and filling my water bottles, and I thought, oh, I better taste this. And I took a big old swig, and it was horrible. It tasted so alkali, and it was very bitter. And I spit it out because I was afraid to drink it. It tastes so bad. And I thought, oh, this is not good. And so I get to a point where I'm at the crest of a hill, and off in the distance, I see a tiny little building out in the middle of nowhere. I thought, well, a building probably means people, probably means water. And I thought, if I could get down there, I bet if there's a hydrant or a spigot or something, I can fill my water and keep going. And I thought, well, I'll leave my pack up here on the trail, and I'll hike down the side of the mountain to it. And it was so hot and miserable. It was about 15, 20 degrees hotter than normal, what it should have been this time of year. I mean, it was like 103, 104 degrees, and it should have been in the 80s. And, there's a lot of switchbacks, and it was, when you first start, you're getting acclimated to this type of travel, whether it's the kayaking or the hiking. The first couple of weeks is, okay, this is a shock to the system. I'm not used to doing these kind of miles, so you're still adjusting. Anyway, I thought, okay, I'm going to hike down. And so I took my Camelback with me and my water filter just in case, and a hatchet because it looked like it was pretty thick underbrush. I start meandering my way down the side of the mountain, and the underbrush is so thick that I'm hatching away, just hacking away with my hatchet, trying to clear a path, and it's so steep, I'm like hanging off tree limbs trying to climb down the mountain. I get about an hour into it, and I said, this is ridiculous. I'm drenched, just dripping with sweat, and I'm covered in dirt and grime, and I'm wet and nasty, and I'm like, I'm working harder trying to get off this mountain than I was walking down the trail. This is ridiculous. And so I get back up to my pack, and man, I honestly just had to stop and pray for a minute. I was like, God, what am I supposed to do? I wasn't worried I was going to die. I had a flare gun. I knew I could get help if I had to, but I was really worried about failing. I told people I was going to walk across America. I'd done all these things to prepare for it, and here I am, like a week and a half into it, and I'm running out of water in the mountains near the desert state, Anzo Borrego Desert State Park. And I thought, this is stupid. I'm going to be like a punchline on the Jay Leno show, and so I prayed, and I thought about it for a little while, and I just had a peace. I was like, just drink your water, eat your lunch, and then take a nap. And that's what I did. I drank the last of my water, ate my lunch, and I just took a nap. And about 5:30, 6 o'clock, after the heat of the day had abated, I threw my pack on, and I started down the trail. And I noticed I was getting further and further away from that building. I'm like, oh, man. And I finally get to this old dirt road where the trail crosses over. And as I get there, and I look off to the west, and I don't see anything. And I see the trail ahead of me, and I don't see any kind of, like today, there's actually a water cache there. Like trail angels go and purposely leave bottles of water there.
Oh, wow.
That wasn't there when I was there. And now today there's like a place just 600 or 700 yards away. It's called Mike's Camp, and you camp there, and there's water and all these great amenities that wasn't there when I was there. and so, you know, and I'm like, man, what do I do? And I look to the east, and there's nothing. And I thought, okay. And I looked to the east again, and I see a cloud of dust off in the distance. And I'm looking, and it's getting closer and closer, and it's a little white truck. And it wasn't hard for me to flag the guy down. I said, hey, you know, I got his attention. He stopped, and I said, man, you got any water? And he says, no, I don't. He said, but there's a town called Aguanga about 20 miles away, and I can give you a lift. And I said, oh, yeah, let's do it. So he had to move all these blueprints and stuff out of his passenger side. He was an engineer, an architect. They were building a Boy Scout camp about 15 miles the other side of the mountain. He was going home for the day. So he gets me into Aguanga, and I found out that it's like this loose translation of water from Native American to Spanish to English. And I get to Aguanga, and I get to this. There's nothing there except like a post office, an RV park, and a little general store. And I mean, it's an old wooden general store. It's like, you know, wooden slats and everything. And you know, the porch creaks as you walk in. And the fellow running the place was a retired Marine helicopter mechanic. And I walk in, and I got this old fedora on, and this bandana, and his khaki shirt, khaki pants, and his 16-inch all over the boots, and I'm dusty and covered in grime. And I mean, I look like I just stepped out of the Old West. Of course, I have this giant pack on. And the guy's like, well, that's a get up. And I said, yeah. And I explained what I'm doing. And I said, man, I need something to drink. And so I had 5 minutes until he closed. I got a couple of bottles of water and a Dr. Pepper. And once he found out what I was doing, he invited me home that night. And I got a shower and got to do my laundry. And it was a really great night compared to what it had been.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of the hike. And then right at the beginning of the kayak trick, just a couple of weeks in, I got blown out to sea.
Oh, wow.
I had a storm pop up and it was blowing me out, and I broke my rudder. And so I fought it for like 3 or 4 hours. And once my rudder broke, it was everything I could to get my bow into the wind and into the waves. It kept pushing me broadside and just pushing me out. I finally thought, man, I should just tie off to a buoy and wait it out. But I'd gotten too far out that there was no more buoys. So I finally had to call the Coast Guard because I carried a little Marine band handheld radio. And so I put a call out to the Coast Guard. And there had been a firefighter in the mouth of the Kennebec River where it was still calm because he was protected. He was fishing, and he heard my distress signal, so he beat the Coast Guard out there to me. And we were able to heave my kayak on the back of his boat and then crash through all these giant waves getting back into Kennebec Port.
Holy cow.
And we had to wait for the Coast Guard to come clear us, and then we fought all the wind and the waves getting back in. And then once we got to the mouth of the river, it was nice and calm again. And he's like, hey, why don't you stay with me tonight? And I said, okay. And we went by the Bush compound, you know, the Walker Point, where the President's Bushes of, you know, their family's been for years. And they had this Navy yard arm. It had the American flag, had the Texas flag, and had the Maine flag. And I was like, man, that's my trip right there. It sums up the whole thing. And I found out that morning that I was in good company, that because H.W. Bush had gotten rescued by the Coast Guard that morning because he got his boat stuck in a lobster trap at the mouth of the river.
That's funny. Surprised you still had somebody answer the call. They must have at the same time. Oh, that's funny, man. That's spooky. Thank God there was somebody there. So whereabouts was that exactly?
Oh, it was off Kennebunkport, Maine.
Okay, very good, man.
Yeah.
Wild. Yeah. And how about paddling? So you paddled along the Gulf Coast for a bit as well, right?
Yeah, mainly I was in the interior of the Intracoastal Waterway, but some places were exposed to the open ocean. But really most of the ocean paddling was up in New England.
Okay.
So from Maine down to Cape Cod. And then I didn't go all the way around Cape Cod. Right at the base is the Cape Cod Canal. And I got about a mile inside it until the Corps of Engineers come out to me and say, hey, you can't be in here. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do? They said, well, you can't paddle a non-motorized craft in here. And I said, well, I'm paddling to Texas, and I don't want to add 250 miles by paddling all the way around the Cape Cod. And they said, well, you could call someone, there's a towing companies. I said, well, you can see I'm in a kayak and I'm on the radio with you. Can you just tell me who to call? And they're like, well, we can't do that because
Jeez.
we're a government organization. We can't, show favoritism. And I'm like, oh, come on, man. And so they eventually just put my boat on theirs and they towed me down to the headquarters about 6 miles south of there. And then I had to wait for the tide to change. And that's another thing is, man, you live and die by the tides out there.
Oh, yeah.
Where I built my kayak, they had 20-foot tides. And further up the coast, they had 39-foot at the Bay of Fundy. It's just phenomenal. Amount of water moving.
In addition to the tides, how does the coastal paddling differ from the river paddling?
So, depending on what the weather is doing, if you have an offshore system moving through the area, you can have giant swells. Depending on if you have a storm system blow up, every afternoon about 1 o'clock, you get this wind that just blows in your face. It's blowing offshore or off land. So, the prevailing wind is in your face. And so as I'm traveling south along the New England coastline, in the mornings it was nice, but about 12:30, 1 o'clock, that was just the time of day, about 15 knots of wind in your face. So I finally just got accustomed to having 3-foot seas and 15 knots of wind right in my face, or it wasn't paddling. And, at first I was lucky to get 10, 12 miles a day in, and then 15, and then I got to where I could get 20 or 25 miles on the ocean. And I felt like it was a pretty big accomplishment, with those kind of conditions.
Yeah, I'd say that sounds wild. I haven't paddled much in the salt water at all, but yeah, it sounds like an entirely different beast.
Yeah, and so I remember being off the coast of Maine and kind of paddling through these big giant rock gardens in the surf, and you have to be careful, but it was a lot of fun. And I carried the equipment for it. LL Bean told me to stay in touch because I told him I was thinking about doing a canoe trip, and so they outfitted me with a $600 dry suit, and really awesome life jacket, and a paddling jacket, and paddles and stuff, and so you have to dress for the water temperature.
Sure.
And everything north of Cape Cod, the water, even in the summer, it's like 55 degrees. And so, you dress for that because if you go in, that's what you're prepared for. Jeez. And then south of Cape Cod, it's like, 65-degree water and then get up to 70 and stuff. But, it's still pretty chilly. Huh.
What's your overarching takeaway from these trips now, almost 20 plus years off, right?
Yeah, I think we're coming up on 24 years. Man, don't be afraid to tackle an adventure. It doesn't have to be these types of adventures that we've gone on. I mean, just live life. We're all on a journey, and it's okay to step out and take chances. Definitely prepare as much as you can, but you can't prepare for everything. And so that's when you really find out humanity, when other people step up to help you out along the way. And that's the thing that I remember most today is, the crazy adventures I had, but more importantly, the people I met along the way. And there wasn't Facebook back then, but having stayed in touch with folks, now I'm able to, I've connected with a lot of people that I met when I traveled, and that's kind of fun to, even today, to still be in touch with people that I met in Arizona and California and New Mexico and Ohio and Tennessee and New Hampshire and Maine. And, I had people from Ohio come and visit me in Texas that I met, and the president of the school and his wife, I spent the winter with them up in Maine building my kayak. But when I got to the Texas Gulf Coast, they came and spent a week with me paddling and just, come and saw me. And, it's phenomenal is the people you meet along the way and the relationships you can build.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing? I say it all the time that, talking to all the people from the podcast, you always, when you set off, you always think it's going to be the mountains or the river or the walk, the stars, and you do remember all those things, and that is, a big reason you go. But yeah, to a T, every person I talk to, it's always about the people. That's what you remember, the connections you make, the people you meet along the way, and then the stories and friendships formed because of it,
Yeah.
Jason,
It makes us better people for it too.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think from both ways, from the people who take you in, and also from the traveler. I mean, yeah, I've become much more open and willing to hear people's stories, and less judgmental, I suppose, of strangers. That's one of the other things I've taken away from doing stuff like this is, man, everybody has a story,
Oh, absolutely.
And it's such a good conduit when you're doing something like that, because your story is so unique that people want to hear your story. But then when you get a chance for them to share their story, and especially with somebody they just met who's an outsider who they don't see every day at the grocery store or whatever, like people really share their stories.
Yeah, they really open up, because it's like some of the barriers that are there in day-to-day life, it's like they're knocked down, and people are more open to share. And maybe it's because maybe you're vulnerable, because they're helping you out at this moment. They're giving you a shower or a place to sleep, and so I think that vulnerability opens the door so that they feel more open and vulnerable to share with you, their life story and such.
Yeah, 100%. So what have you been doing since then? I got to imagine there's been some smaller trips, and you still like getting outside, I have to assume.
Yeah, as much as I can. I'm pretty busy these days. I went to college. I actually had a canoe and kayak rental business while I was in college, and I got a business degree. And then I met my wife, and now we have 5 kiddos. We've been married for, I guess, going on 16 years now, and so I'm very involved with being a dad and helping my wife homeschool, and we're really involved with this Reclaim Arts Academy and putting on different productions. And I took up learning the cello this year. That's something new for me.
Nice.
Old dog can learn new tricks. And we also we're converting we're pretty close to being done with it. We're converting a school bus into an RV so that we can. I mean, we've already been traveling with it. We spent a summer in Indiana with it a couple of years ago, and then spent a summer just traveling in Texas. I think the year before last, went along the coast, camped on the beach, went to the aquarium,
Awesome.
camped in the hills and stuff. And we're hoping this summer we might be able to get off and go up to New England for the summer with our schoolie.
Great. Well,
and yeah,
it sounds like a blast. I spent a little bit of time up in New England as well. My girlfriend's from New England, so I get out to the Cape, and it's a beautiful place to be, especially in the summer.
Oh, it sure is, man. And the lobster and the scallops. Oh, man, oh man.
Oh, you're not lying. Well, Jason, man, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed hearing a bit of your story. Maybe sometime down the road we'll have to connect again, because it's hard to pick apart 2-month journey walking across the U.S. and paddling across the U.S. in in an hour and change or whatever it comes to be.
Yeah, well, I'm actually retelling the story through a podcast, and I think you mentioned earlier, it's the Long Journey Podcast, and you can find out details at journeylong.com.
Great.
And it has details about how people can listen on Apple, or they can listen just on the website or whatever.
Yeah, perfect.
And I'm just breaking it down as the trip happened 24 years ago.
Awesome, man. I'm looking forward to hearing the episodes. Yeah, it's called The Long Journey Podcast. You can get it, I assume, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the places. And,
yeah, absolutely.
And tell me again what the website is.
Journeylong.com.
Okay, awesome. Well, Jason, take care, man, and keep getting outside. Don't let those kids keep you from staying inside all the time.
Oh no, they already love to be on the water.
That's great.
Well, thanks so much, man. It's been a pleasure.
You bet. And there you have it. That is episode 61 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors with Jason Jamar of the Long Journey podcast. That's where you can listen to his show. Please make sure you're subscribed to this podcast if you enjoy it. Also, give us a 5-star rating in iTunes or Spotify, and leave us a review in iTunes and Apple Podcasts. That really helps the show out, helps us reach new listeners. So if you enjoy it, please do that. Also, check out BuffaloRoamer.com. We have the 2023 backcountry canoe trips, dates listed. Spots are going fast, so go check them out and reach out if you want some more info about that stuff. Otherwise, go get outside, have a wonderful day, and we will talk to you soon.